Hi, my name's Mark, one of the pastors at Trillium. I've noticed over the years as a pastor that people can be casual with Jesus' teachings. We can be quite casual in the church, especially. Maybe because we're so acquainted with his teachings, maybe we're so familiar with them, we become so used to them that they just kind of roll off us. We don't really think about them and how profound they are and how difficult they are to live out. Or sometimes we kind of dismiss Jesus' teachings as an example of us pie-in-the-sky idealists. It all sounds great on paper, but kind of impossible to live out in your life. But if we take our Christian theology seriously, then we have to wrestle with his words as more than just human. See, Christian theology says that the God who created all things, the God who is the source of the universe itself, the one who created the universe at the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago, the God who is the source of hundreds of billions of galaxies, each made up of 100 billion or so of stars, that God became a human being in Jesus Christ. And so when Jesus speaks, he's not only speaking as a human being, the mind of God in some way is speaking through him. Of course, these teachings are going to be difficult. Of course, they're not going to always be what we think they are. Of course, they're going to be extremely difficult to implement into our lives. It may take decades, a whole lifetime to finally understand the significance of what Jesus is revealing to us in the moment. Perfect example of this is in the Gospel of John, chapter 6, where Jesus takes 2 loaves and 5 fishes and he feeds 5,000 people. And the crowd recognizes the miracle. They go ecstatic. They try to grab him, make him king. They want to anoint him as Messiah so that he will lead them in victory over the infidel, over the Romans. But in that understanding, that political understanding, they mischaracterize, they misunderstand what the whole point of the miracle was about. A bit later in chapter 6, Jesus is teaching to some of the crowd about the feeding of the 5,000. And he tries to help them understand that what they ate that day was actually spiritual food first, only physical food second. And he offers himself to them as a living bread, a bread that's to be eaten and brought inside. He invites them to eat him and bring him inside of themselves so that they can awaken to the reality of God in their life. But the crowd, of course, misunderstands Jesus' teachings. They think they understand it, but they don't. They misunderstand it, and they reject not only the teaching, but they reject him. And not just the crowd, but many of Jesus' disciples also reject Jesus. They recognize the difficulty of this teaching, and so they leave him. And so Jesus turns to the 12, his core team, and he says, "Are you going to leave me too?" And Peter says this. He says, "Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." St. Augustine once said, "Seek not to understand in order to believe, but rather seek to believe in order to understand." That is, we won't understand Jesus' teachings in advance. It's not possible. It's the mind of God speaking to us through his lips. We won't understand them in advance. We can't. We are asked to implement his teachings in our lives, to apply them to our lives day in and day out, week in and week out, month in, month out, year in, decade in and out, until at some point in the future, our understanding will grow and that is, we won't understand in the moment what Jesus' teachings is about. We can't understand them. It's the mind of God speaking to us. Of course we won't understand. We're actually asked to live them out in our lives by faith at the front end, to apply them to our lives day in and day out, year in and year out, decade in, decade out, with the promise that at some future date we will come to understand their significance for our lives, for the world. Peter and the disciples committed themselves to staying with Jesus. I don't think they understood his teachings that day any more than the crowd or the other disciples. But they committed themselves to staying with the Lord. They recognized who he was, and they took his teachings by faith. And the seed was planted in them. The seed of Jesus' teaching was planted in them. They lived it out. And even when they later crashed in his trial and execution, nonetheless, the seeds had been planted, and they ultimately bore fruit that was awakened by the power of the Spirit. And they came to know not only the heart and mind of Jesus, they came to know the heart and mind of God.